So I have a very basic setup. I have this index.html and a main.js file, and it's working. It shows on the console log that it works. So I want to define a function called fetch JSON data. What arguments will it take? And okay, and then we need to do something. And it would be, it's a function, and then xhr dot response text, this, right? So if we want to use this one, it would be, this is the URL which we give, and then we get movies, and if I have not made any mistake, then it should work. Let us see. It works. So we have these many films returned from that JSON file. So this is the, like, if you want to implement a function which fetches JSON data for you using get, then this is how you implement, and this uses a callback function. So the problem here is that when your callback function will get called, you don't have the control of that. The control is with this function, right? And I'm going to rename this file to old hx, and I'm going to create something called new ajax. So if here, what I will do, I will return a promise. A new promise. Okay, and so like in real life, if someone gives you a promise, that promise can be resolved. I mean, the promise will be completed, or your promise may get rejected, that we cannot serve that promise. So in the real life, it would be like you go to a restaurant, you place some order, they tell you that you will get your food, but then they say that we cannot serve you because we have ran out of ingredients, so we cannot make that thing for you, right? In that case, it's an error. And when the promise gets served, in that case, it's like everything has been fulfilled. So there are two cases: either you will have a success or you will have an error. So the, if you go to Mozilla documentation for promise in JavaScript, this is how a promise is created. You create a new promise. Promise takes a function which has the logic for resolving that promise, and this function gets two arguments by default: resolve and reject. And when you call resolve, then this promise will get resolved, and when you reject, then it will get rejected. So before doing any of this, let's use promise, like simple examples. So promise 1 equals new promise, and this will take resolve and reject, two parameters. And let us say we want to resolve this promise after how many times? 2 seconds. And how do we resolve it? So set timeout will take a callback function, right? I'm using arrow functions everywhere. So then you are going to say resolve this is the value you will get when the promise is resolved. And how do we use this promise? You say promise 1 dot 10, and then okay. So what will happen here? You are creating a new promise. You have a promise. You are subscribing to that promise. Dot then means when this promise has been resolved, and there is also a method called dot catch, which we use with like if there is some error, and then you say this is how you use a promise. So let us say we go and reload this page. After 1 second, it has been resolved. Okay, and I could also reject this promise instead of resolving. So let us say I was going to resolve it after 2 seconds, but for some reason after 1 second, I am not, I'm saying that I'm rejecting. then what will happen? What do you think will happen? Will it be we cannot serve you? Then it will say hello there, or no? Don't think in terms of JavaScript. Think in terms of promises. So I gave you a receipt, right? That you will have your food, but and then I tell you that okay, we cannot serve you. It means that receipt is invalid now because I have that promise has been rejected. Once you have rejected a promise, you cannot resolve it again. So here it's written that after 2000 seconds, after 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds, you want to resolve it. But before resolving, you are going to reject the promise. If you reject it, then it's rejected before getting resolved, right? That's how it should work. Then it should reach here and not here, right? Hopefully. It did not say that hello there, it did not say. So we can go and see how it works in the call stack. What is that tool? What is that? Do you remember?
Oh, where we can see the cube.
Yeah. How do you spell it? Got it. Thank you. Hmm? Why is it not working? No, it runs some other code.
It's not specific. First, yeah, you remove the one which is, you have to remove the one. There is a code inside. You select it, then you paste the new one. Paste the new one. The one you put.
Then it does not have anything. What is? Something is wrong. It's not taking the code for some reason. Okay. I don't know, for some reason it's not working. But do you understand the concept or not? So when we were using callbacks, when something happened, you would, instead of resolve or reject, you would call back the function, right? But in this case, you are here, you have more control. That when this promise gets resolved, then you want to do something and do something here. So when you think in terms of callbacks, it's a nested thing. You are giving a callback function, callback to something, then it can go to another level and it can face something else. Then so you can have nested level of callbacks, and after 3 4 levels, it becomes very difficult to understand what is going on. But in when you think in terms of promises, you can have a chain of promises. So again, here it can be like this: if this has happened, then I want to return another promise. Then you could say promise 2, and I was not going to reject this and not this. So the first promise will get resolved after 2 seconds, and once that happens, this code will run. Okay, and what?
Sometimes set time out is at 2 seconds. Just the indentation.
Yeah, I'm installing a tool for that. Don't use Sublime Text. Spoiled by. Yeah. So here the first promise will get resolved after 2 seconds, and then you will have this line, and here you are returning another promise, let us say. And when the second promise gets resolved, you want to do something. So you can have a chain of promises, and this code is not nested. It does not look that nested, right? No?
Which
This one. And if you are using callback, then I will show you an example of fetching multiple JSON responses from GitHub. Like you make a request to GitHub, then you get some data. Based on that data, you make another API call. Then you get something else, then you make another API call. And the code would be very simple. So if we have to run this code, then what will be the output? First one is getting resolved, and then the second one is getting resolved. Right? So a promise can be rejected or resolved, and you can chain 2 or more promises together, and you can use dot then to have the chaining. So if we had to do it for Ajax, then what will you do? Some code is going to be same, right? So first thing we will do is that we will create a request, okay, and then we will add an event listener. We will create a request, and then we will create a promise, and we will return this promise. After sending the request, we will just return the promise. And when this has happened,
listen from no,
yeah, I need to type reject. and so I think we can put all of this inside this. So we create a promise and we return the promise. And what happens inside that promise? We make a request, and when we have a response from the server, we resolve the promise with the data we have, and then we could also do something on the error. That if we get some error, then we reject the promise. Okay. And how will we use it? Now the syntax would be like this. We do this, and then we do dot then movies console.log movies. So fast. So here we are doing something, and then we are just doing console log. But suppose you wanted to make multiple calls, then you could just do this. So it will make multiple calls, one after another, one after another, and it will be like this. So suppose you had to make, like if it was GitHub API, first you are fetching list of all repos, and then for each repo you are going to fetch collaborators. You wrote some code like that, right? That you have to, or for each repo you want to find commits, latest commits or something, and then you have to make multiple API calls. But you cannot make the next API call unless the first one has been done, because that is the dependency, right? You need to have something to do something else, then do something else. So you have to do a lot of async things in order, in sequence. That first I will do this, I don't know when it will be done, but when that's done, do the next task, and then do the next task, like that. So here, when we make this call, we have a promise, we are subscribing to that promise, and when we have a success, we return another promise, and then we subscribe to that promise again, return another promise, subscribe again, return, subscribe, return, subscribe. So I am like making 8 API calls one after another.
But if we get an error
Yeah.
somewhere,
Then in the end you should say dot catch. If you have an error somewhere, then this catch
say
will.
at the beginning, so all these promises won't be executed.
So suppose you have an error here.
Yeah.
So instead of fetch JSON, you are doing return new promise, resolve, reject, and then you are going to set timeout. And we are going to reject it after 1 second. So this one is going to get rejected, right? So if it gets rejected, it means the first one will succeed, second log will succeed, then we will have third log of movies, and then we would have an error. So the chain has been broken. This got rejected, so it will go to catch directly.
In that case, if we have a 3, 4, 5 fetching the data from APIs, then suddenly we have rejected from the one API, then other will not execute it.
That is what a sequence means. You are doing these things in sequence because they are dependent on each other. In this code, I am doing the same thing, but in a real project, if you had to do dependent tasks and like there were 5 of them and fourth one has failed, then you cannot complete the fifth one, right? You need to handle that error.
And we have an instance where we can ignore the error and continue to execute.
No. No, right? He's saying that if this is getting rejected here, he wants to handle this error and continue.
Oh, if there is a way.
Yeah.
I don't think so. It needs a return statement, I guess.
I don't know if it will work or not. I'm just trying. Yeah, it works. So you can have try then catch, then catch, then catch, and then it will work. But if you put catch in the end, then it will skip everything.
So I would put the catch where I will
So
finish
after
my
each,
sequence.
then you should have a catch,
Yeah.
and then. But here you are able to continue, not because I'm returning a promise after the catch.
Okay.
It's a different thing. It's not good code.
I didn't expect that.
So, like, if you were, let us say, uploading something, and the upload was in 5 steps, and on the third step you get an error. So you want to revert what you did in second and first step. So you make API calls to revert your thing.
Because say there are some instances where, say you are installing the program and you ignore some files which are not like, they have some errors and they tell you to ignore, so you continue the installation.
Yeah.
The same mistake.
No, this is not a desktop software installation. So this generally you don't need. You will not have these many calls. Could be as simple like this, and you would not be returning anything. So in most of the cases, if you want to fetch, it would look like this. And here you don't need to think in terms of callback. Here you get to decide what will happen when the promise gets resolved, what will happen the promise gets rejected. And this function will return a promise, and when it gets resolved, you will have your movies. If it gets rejected, you will have your errors. Okay. So
I see where you put those paths, those empty.
what is empty?
On load, then the empty paths.
This is like, it's like this. Instead of that, I am using an arrow function. So from now on, I will try to use as many arrow functions as possible and use map, reduce, and filter. So we will have lunch at 2:30, but before that, in next 20 minutes, I want you to do something on top of this code. So at this point in the code, you have movies, right? So the task is you have movies. Step 1, get all movies from 2000s release year greater than equal to 2000 and less than equal to 2009. And after, like, whatever you get from step 2, in step 1, in step 2 you have to find top most voted find movie with votes. Tell me a famous film from 2000s. Dark Knight. IMDb. How many votes does it have? It has more than 1 million. Okay. Find movies with votes more than 1 million. And step 3. This is filter. First one is also filter. Second one is also filter. In the step 3, console log title and title votes title release year votes and rating for each film. Okay, is it clear what I want you to do? So you have movies which is like uh, an array of 6527 films, and I have already posted some code on Slack, so you can look here that how to find movies from 80s, so you can find movies from 2000s. Okay, you can go to Slack Class04 and then you have this code, and then you have to filter the votes and everything. So I'm going to post this on Slack and you have to continue from here. How do I do it? It has been so long since we have done a classwork exercise.